studio lights blazed hotter than usual that Monday morning on the set of Morning Affairs, one of the highest-rated political talk shows in America. Hosted by Gavin Blake, a sharp-tongued, suit-clad TV host known for his combative style, the show was infamous for drawing blood from both Republicans and Democrats. But today was different. Gavin had teased the appearance of a special guest all week. Viewers were eager, and so were his critics. Across the country, Americans were waking up to a new era of economic tension. Just days ago, President Donald Trump, re-elected in a shocker that reshaped the political landscape, had announced a massive round of tariff hikes aimed at countries he claimed were exploiting America's manufacturing sector. China, Mexico, Germany, no one was spared. The media was in a frenzy. Markets had responded with mixed signals. Small businesses feared higher import costs. At the same time, Rust Belt towns rejoiced, waving American flags and toasting to a president who, in their eyes, finally stood up for them. The administration insisted it was all part of America First 2.0, a bold economic reset. And right at the center of the storm stood Pam Bondi, the firebrand attorney general known for her no-nonsense courtroom tactics, fierce loyalty to the president, and sharp instincts for dismantling opponents on live television. The moment she entered the set, she owned it. "Good morning, Pam," Gavin said with a tight smile, clearly rehearsed. "Thanks for joining us. Let's jump right into it, shall we?" Pam smiled, calm as ever. "Always happy to be here, Gavin. Let's make it interesting." And interesting it would become. Gavin adjusted his tie, his eyes gleaming behind the camera. He'd prepped all night, going through data, polling, and sound bites. He was sure he'd pin her down. His producers were ready for fireworks. What he didn't anticipate was that Pam Bondi wasn't here to dodge or deflect, she was here to obliterate. "Pam," Gavin began, voice smug, "how does this administration justify hiking tariffs that are, frankly, going to make everyday items more expensive for American families? Aren't you just punching down at consumers to appease industrial lobbies?" Pam raised an eyebrow. "Gavin, are you really suggesting that standing up for American workers is a bad thing?" "Well," he chuckled. "What I'm suggesting is that this move feels less like strategy and more like political theater. Empty nationalism with a price tag. That was it." Pam leaned forward, smile fading. Her voice was firm, deliberate. "Let's talk about price tags, Gavin. The price of your imported goods is nothing compared to the price millions of Americans have paid after decades of bad trade deals. Deals your friends in the elite media class cheered on while our factories closed and towns crumbled." Gavin tried to interject, but Pam wasn't finished. "You call it theater. I call it leadership. What you call nationalism, we call survival. Go tell the steelworker in Ohio or the farmer in Iowa that protecting their livelihood is empty. I dare you." The control room was silent. The audience watching from home leaned in. Pam continued, her tone now colder. "The arrogance of this city, this studio, is exactly why we won. You think your clever questions are going to shame us into silence? You don't scare me, Gavin." A flicker of discomfort crossed Gavin's face. He shifted in his seat. "But Pam, many economists are the same people who said NAFTA would be a net positive and that China entering the WTO would help everyone." She cut in, unblinking. "Where were they when 70,000 factories shut down? Where were you?" Gavin tried to regain ground, raising charts and graphs, citing academic sources, but Pam was relentless. "You can show me all the charts you want. I deal in real people, real pain. You want to talk numbers? Try telling a mother who lost her job at the textile plant that GDP growth is more important than her rent check." A hushed silence filled the studio. Even the makeup artist backstage stood frozen. This was not the polite debate Gavin had envisioned. This was a takedown, elegant, brutal, and unstoppable. Pam Bondi had just fired her first salvo, and the war had only just begun. The tension inside the studio was so thick it could have been sliced with a steak knife. Gavin Blake knew he had to recover fast. The show was live and social media was already beginning to erupt. Clips of Pam Bondi's takedown were being clipped, captioned, and shared before the first commercial break. "Let me rephrase that," Gavin said, forcing a smile. "No one denies that some communities have suffered under globalization. But aren't these tariff hikes just going to make things worse for the same people you claim to defend?" Pam didn't blink. "Gavin, do you even hear yourself?" she asked, now sitting upright, her voice clear and steely. You're trying to argue that fighting back will hurt the very people who've already been hurt by doing nothing. That's like telling a man being robbed that if he resists, he might get bruised. Well, maybe. But you can't just keep getting robbed. Her words hung heavy. She wasn't playing for the studio audience. She was playing for the millions watching from kitchen tables in Michigan, North Carolina, Wisconsin, places forgotten until election season. Let's put this into real-world terms, she continued. Imagine a town that's been making furniture for 60 years. Then, one day, cheap foreign wood cut by underpaid workers abroad floods the market. That town's mill closes. The families? Broken. Tax base? Gone. Schools? Underfunded. All because someone in New York thinks saving $20 on a table is more important than saving American communities. Gavin crossed his legs, trying to stay composed. But he tried. Economists warned that these tariffs could lead to a trade war. Pam leaned in, locking eyes with him. Let me tell you something about war, Gavin. We've been in one. The problem is, we weren't fighting back. She turned slightly to the camera. The last 30 years have been a slow-motion economic ambush. And we let it happen because people like you sat in comfy studios pretending that a rising tide lifts all boats while the working class drowned. The studio crew glanced at each other. Gavin was losing this. And everyone knew it. This administration, she continued, is not going to apologize for finally standing up. And if a few elite media personalities and hedge fund investors don't like it, too bad. The American people voted for a fighter. And they got one. Then she dropped a line that would become the soundbite of the week. We're not here to make foreign diplomats happy. We're here to make Americans employed again. Boom. The live audience behind the glass, normally told to stay quiet, let out a spontaneous gasp. Gavin glanced nervously toward the producers. They didn't cut to commercial. They knew what they had, TV gold. He tried to pivot. Pam, surely you can agree the president's messaging has been, let's say, volatile? Don't you worry these tariffs are more about headlines than results? Pam tilted her head, her lips curling slightly into a smirk. You mean the headlines you people write? The ones that say Trump's tariffs could spark global chaos while ignoring the chaos families in Detroit have been living with for years. She paused. You want to talk about volatility? Let's talk about a system that offshored our dignity. That's volatile. Gavin felt the floor slipping beneath him. He looked down at his note cards, hoping for something sharp to throw back. But it was too late. Pam Bondi had turned the debate into a reckoning. And America was watching. Gavin Blake's collar felt tighter than usual. The temperature in the studio hadn't changed, but his confidence had. Pam Bondi wasn't just defending President Trump's tariff policy, she was demolishing Gavin's questions one by one, without even raising her voice. And worse? She was winning over viewers across political lines. Still, Gavin wasn't going to retreat. Not on live television. Not in front of millions. So he went in harder. You talk a lot about patriotism and forgotten towns, he said, his tone sharper now. But isn't this administration just picking winners and losers? Isn't that government overreach? Isn't that socialism? Pam's eyebrow arched so high it nearly reached the studio ceiling. Oh, come on, Gavin, she shot back. That's rich, you accusing this administration of socialism? When we inherited an economy filled with sweetheart deals, bailouts, and broken promises handed out by coastal elites to corporations that ship jobs overseas with a wink and a tax break. The studio audience behind the glass laughed, not at Pam, but with her. Gavin leaned forward, irritation rising. So tariffs aren't government interference in the market? Pam clasped her hands, calm as ever. No, Gavin. Tariffs are consequences. Silence. She let that land. We're not interfering. We're correcting. For 30 years, American workers were expected to play fair while everyone else cheated, dumping cheap steel, manipulating currency, violating intellectual property laws. And guess what? No one in the studio said a word about that interference. Her voice grew cooler, more surgical. So when we finally say enough, you play dirty, we hit back, suddenly you all clutch your pearls and cry socialism? Spare me. Gavin tried to interrupt, but Pam didn't even acknowledge it. You know what's actually socialist, Gavin? Using taxpayer money to clean up the mess left by shuttered towns and jobless workers after your globalist experiments failed. Now that's redistribution. Boom. Again. Social media was in meltdown. Hashtags like hashtag #PamOwnedGavin and hashtag tariff takedown were trending nationwide. Even left-leaning pundits began whispering behind the scenes, she's not wrong. Desperate, Gavin changed tactics. Let's talk about the president's tone, he said. The tweeting, the name-calling, the rhetoric. How can you defend policies that come packaged with so much division? Pam didn't miss a beat. I'm not here to defend tweets. I'm here to defend jobs, she said flatly. But since you brought it up, maybe, just maybe, if the media spent half as much time on policy as they do on tone, the American people wouldn't feel so disconnected. She turned to the camera again. You want to know what real division looks like? Look outside the Beltway. Look at towns where 3 generations of factory workers were told they'd be replaced by robots or cheaper hands overseas. That's division. That's the fracture you ignored. And now that we have a president who refuses to play nice with the same system that betrayed those people, you think he's the problem? Her voice was cutting now. No. He's the mirror. And you don't like what it shows. Gavin was visibly agitated. His notes lay untouched on the table. His jaw clenched. Pam noticed. See, Gavin, she added with a measured smirk, you came here thinking I'd squirm. You wanted to catch me off guard. You don't realize I live for this. I've gone toe-to-toe with cartel lawyers, career politicians, and corrupt CEOs. You? You're just a guy with a script and a desk. The studio erupted, not with noise, but with tension so thick it buzzed. She leaned back and folded her arms. I'm not here to win your approval. I'm here to speak for the people you stopped listening to years ago. And with that, she delivered a final blow for the segment. You can mock our message. You can attack our tone. But what you can't do, Gavin, is silence the people who sent us here. Not anymore. Gavin sat in stunned silence. And Pam Bondi? She looked unbothered, like a lioness who had just calmly walked away from a shredded opponent. By the time the studio lights dimmed and the segment ended, it was already too late to contain the fire. Within minutes, clips from the live broadcast flooded every social media platform. On X, formerly Twitter, hashtag Pam Bondi Unleashed and hashtag Gavin Meltdown were trending within the hour. YouTube channels from both sides of the political aisle uploaded reaction videos titled, Pam Bondi destroys liberal host in tariff debate. Gavin Blake gets owned, a masterclass by Pam Bondi. Bondi versus Blake, the debate that changed everything. In conservative circles, Pam was instantly hailed a national hero. The base had seen her before, defending President Trump during the impeachment trials, but this was different. This was raw, unfiltered combat on enemy turf, and she walked out undefeated. Even centrists and moderate Democrats couldn't deny it. News anchors on rival networks quietly admitted off-air, Pam had controlled the room. She wasn't just a mouthpiece for Trump's policies, she embodied a fierce, articulate defense of economic nationalism that was becoming harder to dismiss. Meanwhile, Gavin Blake's team scrambled to manage the PR fallout. The network's top producers huddled in a glass conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. Gavin stood inside, rubbing the bridge of his nose while watching the replays on mute. This isn't a hit, one executive muttered. This is a crater. She didn't just fight back, she buried him. We can edit the segment for future airings, another suggested. No, the senior producer said. Too late. It's already viral. In the following 24 hours, mainstream media outlets tried to pivot. Op-eds popped up questioning the administration's trade policy, trying to redirect the debate toward economic nuance. But it didn't work. The public was focused on the moment, not the details. Because for millions of working-class Americans watching from home, many who hadn't cared about tariff percentages or trade deficits, Pam Bondi had just done what they had dreamed someone in Washington would finally do. Speak their truth. Without apology. Without fear. And without backing down. In towns like Youngstown, Ohio, Allentown, Pennsylvania, and Elkhart, Indiana. Pam's debate performance became legend overnight. At diners and job sites, people were pulling up clips on their phones. She said what I've been saying for years, one factory worker told a local reporter. Finally, someone up there gets it. Even Democrats in industrial swing states began to feel the tremors. In private campaign meetings, strategists panicked. This wasn't just about tariffs, one campaign manager said. She reframed the whole argument, she made trade personal again. The next evening, Pam Bondi returned to D.C., stepping off a late-night flight into a small crowd of reporters waiting at the terminal. Pam, did you expect that kind of reaction to the interview? She smiled, brushing her hair back. I expected truth to resonate, she said. The rest? I expected truth to resonate, she said. The rest? That's up to the people. Then came the million-dollar question. Are you planning a run for higher office? She paused. No comment, she said with a small, knowing grin. But the damage or victory, depending on which side you stood on, was done. Gavin Blake remained silent on his own show for a full week. When he returned, his monologue focused on respecting the complexity of trade policy. Viewership had dipped. Pam Bondi, on the other hand, was booked solid on conservative media and late-night shows. The president himself reposted the clip with the caption, "This is what fighting back looks like. Thank you, Pam." Political blogs buzzed with speculation. Could Pam Bondi be Donald Trump's pick for vice president in 2028? Or even his successor? 1 week after the debate that rocked the political media world, the ripple effects hadn't just lingered, they had grown into a tidal wave. Pam Bondi was no longer just the United States Attorney General. She had become a symbol. On college campuses, students studied her segment in communication and political science courses under media strategy and message control. Think pieces debated how she reframed an entire conversation under pressure and flipped the power dynamic live on air. Even some journalism schools grudgingly called it a textbook case of rhetorical domination. Meanwhile, inside the White House, President Donald Trump was pleased and he made no effort to hide it. In a closed-door meeting with his top advisors, he tossed his phone on the table, the video clip of Pam eviscerating Gavin Blake playing in a loop. "This," he grinned, "is what we need more of." Stephen, his chief of staff, nodded. The base is on fire. Swing voters too. Pam didn't just defend tariffs, she told them why they mattered. And people listened. "I'm thinking," Trump said, leaning back. "We send her to Ohio, Michigan, Florida. Let her do what she did on that stage, but in front of 10,000 voters." The idea caught like wildfire. Within days, Pam was announced as the headline speaker for a jobs-first tour crisscrossing key battleground states. The rallies were electric. It was like watching the resurgence of a forgotten American dream delivered by a woman who blended Southern steel with courtroom precision. At one event in Toledo, Pam took the stage with a firm but warm tone. "They said tariffs would cause pain. But you've already felt pain, haven't you? The kind that comes when your plant closes and the press writes a 2-paragraph story and moves on. Well, this administration didn't move on. We moved in." The crowd roared. By the time she left the podium, Fox News was already declaring Pam Bondi the GOP's secret weapon. Back in D.C., Gavin Blake was still trying to recover. Ratings had slid. Sponsors were uneasy. And the worst part? He was now a meme. A still shot of his stunned face from the debate had been turned into thousands of reaction GIFs with captions like, "When Pam Bondi drops a truth bomb. When you realize facts, feelings. When the script doesn't go as planned." But it wasn't just his pride that had taken a hit, it was the narrative. Because what Pam Bondi did on that stage went beyond defending Trump's trade policy. She exposed how out of touch the media had become with Main Street America. She proved that a strong, unapologetic voice could break through the noise and reach people who had long tuned out. And she did it with facts, poise, and absolute conviction. Washington insiders buzzed with predictions. Could she run for Senate? Would Trump tap her for a Supreme Court nomination someday? Was she positioning herself for a 2028 run? Even Gavin's own staff began to whisper what he couldn't say out loud. Pam Bondi hadn't just won a debate. She had changed the game. And deep down, even Gavin knew it. One night, alone in his office, he watched the clip again. This time without the urge to interrupt. No defenses. No counterpoints. Just silence. Then, a quiet nod. She was good, he admitted. Damn good. As the 2026 midterms approached, candidates on both sides studied her performance like gospel. Republican hopefuls emulated her style. Direct, principled, and ferociously prepared. Even Democrats knew they had to change course or be swept aside by this new wave of populist energy. And somewhere in the heart of America, a young woman, maybe in Ohio or maybe a small town in Kentucky, watched Pam Bondi speak on TV and whispered to herself, "Someday that'll be me." And just like that, the next revolution was already beginning.